Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea reports an increase in the daily figures for COVID-19, possibly reflecting the long holiday last week in which millions of Koreans traveled across the country to see family. A top North Korean diplomat who disappeared in Italy 2 years ago is revealed to have defected and settled in South Korea. He's the second highest-ranking envoy from the regime to do so under Kim Jong-un. And the global credit ratings agency Fitch has decided to keep South Korea's sovereign credit rating at AA- with an outlook of stable, citing its strong economy and the sound fiscal position of the government. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea reported more than 100 cases of COVID-19 today. It's the first time that's happened in a week. Officials say this could be the result of people traveling throughout the country last week for the Chuseok holiday. Kim Myun-sung reports.
The number of coronavirus cases in South Korea shoots back up with 114 cases reported on Wednesday. This is the first time in a week that the number of new cases has hit triple digits. Health authorities suspect that the impact of the 5-day-long Chuseok holiday is finally showing in the domestic COVID-19 tally, with over 30 million people estimated to have traveled during the break.
The special Chuseok virus prevention period will continue through this weekend, including October 9th, so we ask for your continued cooperation. It's necessary to carefully examine whether the number of new cases will rise more after the holiday, or if it's just a temporary blip due to increased testing.
But local infections remain below 100 for the 13th straight day. On Wednesday, there were 94 local infections, and most of them were from the densely populated capital region. Group infections continue to pop up in Seoul and the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province. 29 cases as of Wednesday came from a cluster at a rehabilitation hospital in Uijeongbu City just north of Seoul. Health authorities have secured a list containing over 400 people related to the hospital and are conducting extensive tests to uncover other potential carriers of the virus. They are also trying to find the source of infection that led to 37 cases at a military base in Pocheon, Gyeonggi-do province. Kim Myun-sung, Arirang News.
The head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, says there is hope that a COVID-19 vaccine could be ready by the end of this year. That's according to a Reuters report, but it says he gave no further details. He was speaking Tuesday to the WHO Executive Board. There he also said that there are 9 experimental vaccines under development by COVAX, the international alliance to accelerate vaccine development. That initiative aims to distribute 2 billion doses by the end of next year. In other news, North Korea's former ambassador to Italy, who disappeared 2 years ago, it's emerged, has settled in South Korea. Kim Da-mi has the details.
After having disappeared from Rome 2 years ago, a former senior North Korean envoy to Italy is reportedly now living in South Korea. South Korean lawmaker Ha Tae-kyung of the main opposition People Power Party said on Tuesday that Song-gil came to the south last year under the protection of the South Korean government. Multiple informed sources confirmed later that Jo arrived in South Korea through a third country. South Korea's National Intelligence Service has yet to confirm Jo's status. But if confirmed by the intel agency, Jo would be the highest-ranking North Korean official to defect to South Korea in 21 years. Under Kim Jong-un, who took power in 2011, the highest-ranking official to defect before Jo was the North's former number 2 diplomat in London, Tae Yong-ho, in August 2016. Jo became the regime's acting ambassador to Rome after the Italian government kicked out the then diplomat over the North's missile test in September 2017. Early last year, Italy's foreign ministry confirmed that Jo's daughter was repatriated to the north at her request after her parents disappeared. But his whereabouts had been unclear since November 2018, with reports suggesting he was seeking asylum in a third country. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Global credit appraiser Fitch Ratings has decided to keep South Korea's rating at AA- with an outlook of stable. AA- is the fourth highest rating, and Korea has kept this rating since 2012. Fitch said it based its decision on South Korea's steady economic performance, despite challenges including North Korea and its aging society. It added that although the pandemic is weighing on the economy, South Korea has been limiting the damage through robust policy responses. Fitch forecast the country's GDP to contract by 1.1% this year, which is a smaller decline than the Bank of Korea's projection of a 1.3% contraction. In the pandemic, the global economy seems to have avoided the worst-case scenario when it comes to trade. And according to the IMF, economic growth is recovering faster than expected. Kim Yo-sun reports.
The WTO forecasts global trade will drop by 9.2% this year, revising its earlier forecast. In April, the international body predicted the volume of world merchandise trade would plunge by 12.9% as the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted normal economic activities globally. It explained that the revision factors in a slight rebound of trade following the easing of lockdowns in many European nations in June and July.
GDP is doing worse than expected, and the trade decline not as much as expected. Compared to the great financial crisis, trade's being more resilient this time around, and particularly in some critical products that are helping to mitigate the effects of COVID.
The WTO added this will be followed by a 7.2% rise in global trade volume next year, a slower recovery than it previously expected. It highlighted that global trade could be negatively affected in the case of a massive second wave of the coronavirus internationally. The International Monetary Fund also says it will revise this year's global economic outlook as the global economy strengthened more than expected since June. While speaking at the London School of Economics on Tuesday, the chief of the international body said that the situation is less dire, adding that the world economy is rebounding from the depth of the crisis. In June, the IMF predicted that the world economy would contract by 4.9% following the pandemic, the sharpest decline since the Great Depression in the 1930s. However, the international organization explained that a massive $12 trillion worth of financial aid helped many countries, including the U.S., the Eurozone, and China, avoid a worst-case scenario and begin recovery. Forecasting an uneven recovery of the global economy in 2021, the IMF warned that the crisis is far from over. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose to a new all-time high in September for a fourth month in a row. According to the Bank of Korea, reserves amounted to some $421 billion last month, an increase from August of around $1.6 billion. The central bank attributed the rise to the recent issuance of foreign exchange stabilization bonds, as well as an increase in revenue from foreign currency assets. As of the end of August, South Korea's FX reserves were the 9th largest in the world, China being number 1. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-sok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good to have you back on.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks in New York overnight gave up most of the gains from the previous day after President Trump said that for now he's ending talks with the Democrats about new stimulus. But just hours later, Trump said he wanted stimulus checks sent out immediately. So what's the story in the global markets?
Okay, well, as you just mentioned, the markets basically lost what was gained on Monday. So Trump giveth and Trump taketh away. But it's not clear what President Trump's reasoning was for canceling the negotiations for the stimulus. Now, if you look at his Twitter messages, one seems to indicate that he would rather prefer to have the senators concentrate on getting the new Supreme Court judge in court before the elections. Another message, it seems to indicate that President Trump is not behind the stimulus because it will give money to badly run democratic states, though how badly run is up to question. And then there's some speculation that perhaps this is a negotiation move by President Trump. There's also other claims which says that because the stimulus negotiation comes so near the election day, that money will not be dispersed before the election, so it will not do any good for President Trump's re-election chances. So in another tweet, President Trump apparently said that he will not negotiate with for the stimulus now, but as soon as he is reelected, he will implement a stimulus plan virtually right after reelection. So we don't quite know exactly what President Trump has in mind, but it is definite that at least for the American markets, the stop in the stimulus negotiations did have an adverse effect in the market, especially because the Fed Chairman Powell said that the United States needs another very large stimulus if they're going to get beyond or start recovery from the coronavirus shock. But the European markets and the global markets, they don't seem to be really that much affected. The Asian markets, the markets were mixed, but even the market which fell didn't really fall that much, and the Korean market actually rose today. So the other markets seem to be taking a wait-and-see attitude.
Yes, as you say, in Korea, it started out lower today, but then strong buying by institutions brought it back up into positive territory. It seems, as you indicate, hope for stimulus. What's the story in the local markets?
Okay, well, the local market, the Kospi went up today by 0.89%. Kosdaq went up by 0.82%. And it was, at least for the Kospi market, the individuals and foreigners sold, institutions bought, and on the in the Kosdaq market, the institutions and foreigners bought. So again, it seems to be a bit of a mixed market, but we seem to be not being affected that much by President Trump's stop in negotiations. That may be because, well, we had a very good export figure last week, and that might be having effect even still. But I think given the changes in policies that President Trump goes through, and there is some question on whether President Trump is fully thinking things through right now because he just got out of the hospital, that I think not only Korean markets but also other Asian and European markets are just taking a wait-and-see attitude and ignoring more or less what's going on in the United States, at least for now.
Well, Professor, in other news, we have the government proposing a measure that would regulate state spending by keeping either the debt to GDP ratio under 60% or the deficit to under 3% of GDP. This has created quite a lot of controversy. Could you explain that, and what do you make of this proposal?
Okay, well, the proposal, I think, is both too tight and too lax, and I will have to explain that. In normal times, as you mentioned, the consolidated government budget deficit has to be below 3%, and this seems to be incredibly lax because Korea usually has a consolidated government balance surplus, and even when it goes into deficit, it only went below minus 3% twice in the last 30 years, once during the Asian financial crisis and now during the coronavirus. So this minus 3% rule seems to be much too big an allowance. And they're also using consolidated government balance as a criteria. The problem with using the consolidated government balance is that consolidated government balance looks only at the budgets for the government agencies and government ministries. But if there is a problem with Korean budgets, it lies in social funds like unemployment insurance and medical insurance and state-owned enterprises. And these numbers are not included in the consolidated government balance. So the opinion is that we should use a more wider version of the government balance instead of the consolidated budget. And then during emergencies, the government can increase the amount that it can spend. It can raise that deficit level to minus 4%, but that seems to be too tight. That's because, well, this year, because of the coronavirus, our government deficit will be more than minus 5%. And other countries, if you look at the OECD projections, their government deficit will be much bigger than minus 5%. So in a sense, if there is an emergency, then this type of rule may force austerity measures when we need expansionary policies. And this was the problem that Europe got itself into in 2008, where it ended up that ill-timed austerity policies really delayed their recovery for years. And then there's the problem of starting this rule in 2025. That seems to be passing the buck, passing all the responsibilities to the next government, because if you look at the budget projection that the Moon government put out during the summer, then until 2024, government spending will be rising. Government deficits will be above minus 3% for the consolidated budget surplus. So it seems to be saying we're going to spend a lot, and any problem that we come up with, any problems that can lead to GDP debt ratio going beyond 60%, it'll be the next government that has to deal with it. We're just going to spend and leave. So in many ways, I think this was ill-timed. I think what we need much more than just having simple rules is some kind of a mechanism to look at each individual government programs and spending so that we know that they're efficient. And any inefficient programs, any programs which does not carry out its goals, it should be cut.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for today. Professor, thank you for that fascinating explanation and all great points.
Thank you.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.